was the fly on the wall.
And it's a reunion of sorts for us, because 27 years ago, we were privileged to have Amalie's first exhibition in our former gallery in New York City. And Amalie spends most of her time in Italy, but also in New York. Us moving to Santa Fe, it's taken 27 years for the worlds to come back into sync. But just very briefly, Amalie is an award-winning filmmaker and photographer. She's also one of the 4 founders of the successful and progressive 53-year-old film distribution cooperative called New Day Films. Among the many films she has made is the groundbreaking It Happens to Us, made in 1971 by an all-woman crew. The documentary lays out the dire realities of illegal abortion, interviewing women from a variety of backgrounds who made the choice to terminate a pregnancy when abortion was still illegal. At the Fillmore East, Amalie was considered the theater's de facto house photographer. She had unlimited access on stage and backstage to all the happenings at the Fillmore East, and was on staff at the 1969 Woodstock Festival. During that period, she photographed most of the major rock music events on the East Coast, as well as many anti-war and peace demonstrations in the U.S. during the 1960s. We're thrilled to have Amalie here tonight. Thank you so much.
Well, the first thing, actually, that I want to do is to thank Sid and Michelle. And as Sid laid out, Sid was one of the triad, the Soho Triad Fine Arts Gallery in New York City. And it's the first gallery that I've been with, and it showed my photographs starting in 1997. And when they went out of business in 2003, mostly because of what happened in New York City with 9/11, and Sid and Michelle moved out here, I was really happy that they chose me as one of the many photographers at Soho Triad to continue to represent. So this is really great. I'm going to sit down and I kind of backed into, there were no rock photographers when I started taking these pictures. There were just us photographers who ended up in the right place at the right time photographing these events, and then there were the guys like Baron Wolman and Jim Marshall and other people whose names are probably familiar to you, and Elliot Landon, who ended up creating this amazing career as rock and roll photographers. I worked for this brief period from 1968 to 1974 when I had this privileged access through the Fillmore East, which actually closed in 1971. But I also was able to photograph the Bob Dylan, the New York concerts of the Bob Dylan tour in 1974, which is pretty much when I ended the rock and roll photography, although I maintained good relations with the Allman Brothers, who a number of years later began to come back and do 2 weeks of shows at the Beacon in New York every March. And I did arrange my travel plans a lot to be in New York in March because they gave me access. They gave me backstage passes and let me take pictures, which was really cool. So those are the most recent rock and roll pictures I made, but that's already 10 years ago when their last concerts were in 2014. But my early work was doing some piece work, and I was at NYU Graduate Institute of Film and TV. I was in the first class when they set that up, and I was one of 6 women out of 34. And it was right next door to what had been the Village Theater, which turned into the Fillmore East. And all of the staff and crew at the Fillmore East were basically New York University students, theater tech program students, and a number of us at from the film school. And I went to Rhode Island School of Design and studied graphic design and still photography, and I lived in Italy my senior year on the honors program and did my senior thesis project as a book of photographs of old Rome, and I set up the dark room there. And I always had my cameras with me. And when I got to New York for graduate school at NYU, my studio apartment was broken into, and my cameras were all stolen. And I replaced them, and then I carried them around with me all the time because I was because actually they were stolen twice. I had a fire escape, and they broke in through the gate, and the second time the insurance wouldn't replace them either, but my mom and dad stepped into the fray. So I always had my cameras with me. So when the film equipment technician at NYU said, hey, you know, the Fillmore East is open next door, and he was one of the sound people, he said, you know, you really like it, it's cool, here's a pass, come by at 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon. And I didn't know anything about any of that at the time, and I walked in on Friday afternoon, and on the wall in the sound booth was a poster I had designed for one of our student films. And it's like the hair stood up on the back of my neck. Oh, I'm in here already. I sort of belong. And I was the techie, nerdy girl in school, which is why the film equipment technician, you know, we got along and why he thought I'd be interested. And I had my cameras with me, and he started giving me passes every week, and I just showed up and had free run of the place, could take pictures, could do whatever I wanted. And I just started taking pictures because it was so amazing what was going on. But what interested me a lot was backstage. My real buddies there were the technicians. And the Fillmore East is really where rock theater, rock music became rock theater. All of the technical innovations that became the standard for the presentation of rock music, and 100,000 seat amphitheaters were born there through the work of all of these students. That included intercom systems for staff to communicate, the use of light shows. At that time, it was all obviously done by hand. But the music and the lighting and all of the set change dollies, all the technology. And it was also very different from the hippy-dippy ballroom scene in San Francisco, which is where most of the groups, like the Grateful Dead and so forth, and the Jefferson Airplane and everybody got their start, because it was a 2,352 seat theater with a proscenium arch and a backstage, and so people had numbered seats, and so you had to really present a show. And Bill Graham, who the impresario of the theater, really understood that, excuse me. And so that led to the development of all the equipment and the presentation of a theatrical production, not just a bunch of musicians standing up there playing with lights running around and everybody standing up or sitting down or dancing or whatever. It was a show. So I guess it might be worthwhile to look at a few extra pictures than what Sid and Michelle have interrupted their exhibition to put me in here. But it so happens that actually my very first music photograph of Thelonious Monk was taken in 1964. So that's why I'm here. And that was at Rhode Island School of Design when he was there for fall break weekend, and I had an assignment to design a record cover for a graphic design class, and I said, oh, Thelonious Monk, because I knew him. I already heard him live in Washington, D.C. in 1959. I said, oh, great, I'm going to photograph him. And so that's why I have these pictures, because I used them for my graphic design class. Okay. I also did a number of, as Sid mentioned, the civil rights rallies. This is Washington in 1968. And this, interestingly, was a George Wallace rally at Madison Square Garden. And you can see in the middle there, I sincerely believe, I'm not 100% sure that it's Jesse there with the guy. You can see the Wallace signs and all the white men pointing at the two black people in there. And this is on the set of Alice's Restaurant, and that's Arlo Guthrie with the hat. And This was taken in Central Park after Martin Luther King was assassinated. It's a double exposure. I did a lot of double exposures in the camera. There was no digital photography in those days. And then this is the Fillmore East, and its crowd was for Crosby, Stills, and Nash tickets, and it was the first time so many people showed up in the middle of the day, and I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. I have to document this. I mean, my instincts have always been documentary. I make documentary films too. And so I managed to talk myself up on the roof across the street and got this picture. It's the corner of, the address of the theater is 105 2nd Avenue. It's the corner of 2nd Avenue and 6th Street. And the NYU Theater Tech program was down the street on that side, on 6th Street. And the film school was around the corner at 40 East 7th Street, but it backed into and connected with that white building there. To the right, and that's the Saul Burns building, and that's where the originally the School of the Arts programs were. But it's become Tisch School of the Arts, I'm sure. So many of you know that name, but there was no Tisch yet, and the dance program was in there, and film school and so forth. So that's Bill Graham, impresario, who was very nice to me. He let me come in and take personal pictures in the office, and they used a lot of my pictures in the program guides also. Listen, while we're doing this, if anybody has any questions, you can break in. It's okay. I don't mind. So that's the theater. This was in December of 1969, and look at that combination of groups on the marquee. I mean, we don't have that kind of music anymore like that. And at the time, the tickets were $3, $4, and $5. And they did raise the ticket prices in early 1970 to $3.50, $4.50, and $5.50. That was the time when you could get a hero sandwich at the concession stand for like 30 cents. And Bill Graham had a lot of social conscience, and this was a quote from R.D. Laing during the Christmas holidays. I don't know. It's actually, I took a picture of it because I love what it says. I don't know if you guys can read it or whether it's worth my quoting it, but anyway. And welcome to the Fillmore East, the Joshua Light Show. It's up on the screen. And this was a sound check rehearsal for Jimi Hendrix Band of Gypsies on December 31st, 1969. You can see the empty house. And this picture of the rehearsal has been published a lot. This Hendrix on the left and Billy Miles in the center and drums, and Buddy Miles on the drums and Billy Cox on bass on the right. And, this picture was in my first show at Soho Triad, and when they first opened, they had this picture in the window, and I don't know if it's the first picture they sold, but it's the first picture of mine that ever got sold when I started having my photographs available through galleries. And this is a multiple image that I put together from the show. Some more. I did a lot of multiple images. These were done after I learned Photoshop 30 years ago, but at the time I did mostly everything in the camera, multiple exposures. This is Laura Nero, who may not be familiar to many of you, but I think she was she was still my favorite singer of all time. And she's the only contemporary singer that Joni Mitchell said influenced her. So, but she kind of shunned the spotlight, and she died of ovarian cancer when she was 49. But her biggest success to the general public was because so many other groups did covers of her songs, which were, top 40 hits. Like Eli's Coming, for example, Stone Soul Picnic. I mean, there's a whole lot of them, for those of you that know. And for those of you that don't, and if this name is new, Laura Nyro, Nyro, I suggest you do a Google and listen to some of her music, because she's wonderful. And this is a triple exposure in the camera of Joni Mitchell. You could do something like this today in Photoshop, but it was a lot harder to do that in the camera, because in those days, the Nikon Fs, you didn't just hold a button on the bottom of the camera and advance the frame, and it didn't frame it. No, you'd have to advance the frame, hold the button, and then there was a dot on the shutter release, and you had to then wind it back one rotation of that dot in order to get the frame back in the gate, where you can then take a second exposure. That was 3 times there. And this is from the same gig. And this is a double exposure with the audience behind her. And this is my favorite Janis Joplin shot. I call that smiling Janis. And I did a multiple from various, the frames that I took. This is actually from these are taken from two different times that she played at Fillmore East. And this is probably my best known photograph. People don't necessarily know that I took it, but they've seen this photograph. It's been published a lot, and it's a bestseller. I don't know how many, Sid, but I know that the Monroe Gallery of Photography has sold a lot of copies of this photograph. Well, it always seems to me that you're asking for more prints. And that was taken because it was at the Rolling Stones concert on Thanksgiving evening, November 27th, 1969, and Bill Graham had regularly did all kinds of stuff for the family, the Fillmore family, and he had Thanksgiving dinner in the lobby at the Fillmore, and then we all went up to the Stones concert in Madison Square Garden that night, and Janis was alone in New York, had come to Thanksgiving dinner and went up to the garden with us, and many of us had tickets, but she didn't, but of course they got her in, and she was standing on the side of the stage. Ike and Tina Turner and the Ikeettes were the opening act on that tour. It was the same tour that ended in Altamont. And Janis, was just standing there, and Tina saw her standing there and said, "Oh, come up and sing." So she came up, and they sang this one song, and for years I had no idea what they were singing. But recently I found out that they were singing Proud Mary. I asked the Maisels who shot the film Gimme Shelter, and they filmed this. I was friends with the Maisels, and I asked Al. They said, "Oh, we lost the audio for that. I don't remember," whatever. So I was never able to find out. And then about a year or so ago, maybe it was 2 years ago, but in any event, I got an email out of the blue from someone who was there and had seen this photo reproduced in something that some interview with me about not knowing what they were singing, and he told me. I said, "Great, that's good. Now I know." Okay. You can see her, the button on her. Left there, and it says Rolling Stones, just in case you're not sure. All right. And this was, afterwards, they, put it together. This is a multiple put together in Photoshop. Crosby, Stills, and Nash, they did a week in June of 1970. So it was Crosby, Stills, and Nash and Young, on and off with Young. So that's... And this is Neil Young with Crazy Horse, sound check. The Grateful Dead played at the Fillmore 27 times, and I didn't shoot them all every time, but I shot a lot of them. But when I began working with my photographs, also for putting my book together, the hardest thing I had to do was to date, because this is probably the stupidest thing I've done in my entire life, was I wrote down the names of the groups on my negative files, but I didn't write down the dates. It was Friday night, that day, and Saturday night, early show, late show. The Fillmore ran mostly Friday nights and Saturday nights, and there were 2 shows at 8 o'clock at night and 11:30 at night, and there were always more people came. They always sold out 11:30 first, and all the real hippies and everybody came because those shows could go on until dawn if everybody was in the mood, whereas the 8 o'clock show had to be finished in order for the 11:30 show. So anyway, the Dead played all those times, and I did the best I can because the Bill Graham Presents organization gave me their database to try to reconstruct the dates of when I took my pictures. And that was possible in some cases because through the database I could see, the Grateful Dead played this weekend, and the next weekend was, another group. And when I finished photographing on any weekend, if I hadn't finished a roll of film, I just left it in the camera and I started up again the following weekend. And so I was able to then know what dates it were because on the same negative file I had, the Grateful Dead and whatever the next group was the next time. But I got it wrong a lot of times. And how do I know that? Because my first exhibition at Soho Triad Fine Arts in New York City in June of 97. Was that right, Sid? Yeah. A lot of people that came to see it, I wasn't there most of the time, and I'd come in and visit, and they'd have all these little 3x5 cards with notes written on it from people who'd seen the show, the different shows, and they corrected the dates. They said, no, in this picture it was that date because Jerry was wearing a different tie-dye T-shirt, or or the decoration on the front of the drum set changed, or whatever it was. So I have, over the years, been able to correct a lot of the dates of my photographs, which was the same with the Janis Joplin, the one in the white, the smiling Janis in the white outfit, I thought was from the same time as the one with the hair, this next one. And I didn't realize that that was not the case until my bread and butter is licensing my archive. I have about 20,000 pictures, and maybe I've, by this point, scanned and worked with 4,000, 5,000 or so of them. And I get requests, and each time I get requests for something that I haven't done anything with, I'll go back to the archive. And sometimes I also find pictures that I had discarded and didn't think were worthwhile that then become gallery quality, that I had different criteria at one time or another. In any event, they were making a film about Mavis Staples and the Staples Singers a few years ago, and they came to me to look to see what I had, and I went back in the archive, and I'd never done anything with the Staples Singers, and I'd scanned a lot of material, which I sent to them, and on the negative files, one of the negative files was a whole strip of Janis in that outfit. Then I went back and looked at the database. Oh, she played there that weekend. Wow. And I was redated that photograph. And I think there's a print of it over there. And the date's wrong because those prints were made before I knew what the correct date was. So I don't know if that makes any difference with the value. It's like that upside down airplane with the stamps, but in any event. So the hardest thing I've had to do is to reconstruct the dates of when I took most of these photographs. So this is, I know the date for this one. This was January 2nd, 1970. And it was right after the Jimi Hendrix Band of Gypsies. They did the New Year's Eve concert. That was December 31st, 69, and then they played the New Year's Day show, and then the Grateful Dead came in. And this is probably my most successful rock and roll picture in the sense that you can see, first of all, it's the Grateful Dead after all, but you can see every member of the Dead clearly, and you can see the whole audience. And it's one of the few times I actually used flash. And I'm very happy with this picture. And this, I don't know about how it's done here in Santa Fe, but this picture has sold a lot and been published a lot. All right. And this is kids trying to get into the concerts that were all sold out. I did a lot of backstage and other stuff, which was actually more interesting to me. This is the first time that people showed up to camp out to buy Grateful Dead tickets when the box office opened at noon the next day. So I thought, wow, got to take pictures of this. This is so crazy. And that was, one could say that this is maybe, the beginning of the Deadhead phenomenon, or at least you began to have a name for these kids that followed the Dead. This is Woodstock. I was on the light show platform. This is taken with a 135 millimeter lens, just right out under this complete carpet of people. This is before the concert. As some of you know, the concert didn't start when it was supposed to because they were way behind in constructing everything. As people were filling in the field. I always wondered who that kid might have been. And years later, I got an email from his wife who wanted to buy a print, which he got through the gallery for his 50th birthday. So his name is Jim Vaca, and I wouldn't have recognized him today, but I had a gallery in Denver for a while, and I had a solo show out there, and he lives out in Colorado, and so when I had my show, I invited him and his wife to the opening, and they came, and we met, and it was really nice. Backstage, and this was in the around the base of the stage. And this is the film crew. That's Michael Wadley, the director of the Woodstock movie, and that's his wife Renee, who was a camera assistant, and that's Martin Scorsese, who was an associate producer on the film with the headset there. And I still don't know who the guy with his eyes closed are. Oh, and over the head, is Dale Bell, who was a producer on the film. It's a Jefferson Airplane at Woodstock. I only took 9 rolls of film to Woodstock. Who knew what that was going to be? And I used the film up, most of it. We got there 3 days for the light show to set up 3 days before, so I have all this backstage stuff of setting it up. And so I had very little film left to film the groups. So I really have, the Jefferson Airplane is just about the only group playing at Woodstock that I have still, photographs of. Also, they played during the day, so that was easy. But I did have the light show's film camera, and I shot some 16 millimeter material as well. And in fact, so many of the cameras of the film crew for the Woodstock movie broke down that they came to us and wanted to borrow the light show NPR acclaimed camera, 16 millimeter camera. And we said, yes, you can do it, but Amalie has to be the camera person, I was the one that used it, and they didn't want me. I was a girl, sexism rides again. So they didn't get the camera. And, and I shot some stuff that I've used in some of my own stuff later on. I love this picture of her. Yeah. So that's me at Woodstock. Somebody grabbed my camera and got that one shot. It's proof I was there. It's Nina Simone, who I love. Yeah. Ray Charles, I also love. One of the great things about Bill Graham is that he was really committed to introducing the rock and roll kids to all kinds of music. So he did a lot of very creative programming. So he would have, like with Led Zeppelin and James Cotton, blues singer. And in fact, when they had that bill, they booed James Cotton, which was the opening act, and he happened to be in New York at the time, and he came out and he lectured. He said, listen, none of these rock stars that you love would even be who they are if they hadn't heard the music of people like James Cotton. They were inspired by it, and you owe the respect to the black originators of all this music, and I'm here to make sure that you hear their music too. And then he gave a set, and they loved him, then come back and do an encore. But it was really important to have a lot of different music. He had some jazz, besides Ray Charles, and he had Dizzy Gillespie did a set. He even actually had a set with Mitch Mitchell. What's the band leader? Yes, Mitch Miller, sorry. Mitch Mitchell, sorry about that. Mitch Mitchell was a drummer with original band, Jimi Hendrix Experience. No, Mitch Miller, of all people. So it was fantastic music. It had Chuck Berry, Isaac Hayes, a lot of really, really good, and Sly and the Family Stone. So this is also another double exposure. That's the image on the front of his band members' stands, music stands. This is B.B. King, and this was at Newport. And James Brown, also at Newport. And this is Sly Stone at Newport. And Miles Davis at Newport. Miles Davis also played at the Fillmore East. It was a time of when the album came out called Bitches Brew, very rather avant-garde jazz. Bob Dylan, that's just from the Isle of Wight. I was a photographer there, and this particular picture was on the cover of issue 43 of Rolling Stone. And this is from 1974, Nassau Coliseum. And this is at Madison Square Garden. This is probably my favorite picture of Bob Dylan because I'm reflected. I saw myself reflected in his glasses when I took the picture, and I wondered, gee, is this going to come out? I was using a 300 millimeter lens, and I don't know. I also was very proud compositionally. By the way, I use these natural negative edges to show that I composed the picture in the frame, and what you see is what you get. I didn't take pictures and then crop them afterwards. I had professional training, fine art training as a photographer, and I took great pride in being able to compose the pictures in the frame and take them the way I wanted them to be without doing any crop or whatever. But you can see here, I got the reflection of his hand in there, and if you look, there's a round thing there, and that was my lens when I saw myself taking the picture. This is at Tanglewood. Bill Graham produced rock and roll concerts at Tanglewood in the summer of 1969 and again in 1970. And this is also a double exposure in the camera. And this was Isle of Wight, where I took my favorite picture of Roger Daltrey, which some of you may have seen if you're into all of this, because they licensed this for me. It's on the back cover of his autobiography. These are various shots of when The Who performed Tommy for the first time from start to finish at the Fillmore East in October of 1969. And John Lennon and Yoko Ono backstage when they showed up with Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention on June 5th, 1971. And around 2 in the morning, all of us on staff knew that they were going to go on and play an encore, which was a big deal. And I actually filmed it in sync sound without any permission, and it's been used after that. I've had a lot of, that's a whole other story. But this was after the concert was finished, after they cleared out the public, and they were waiting in the seats until the public was gone, so it would be safe for them to leave. And this is Madison Square Garden, Rolling Stones concert. That was You know, this was like stadium, overwhelming crowds when compared to the Fillmore, which was really quite intimate, even though there were, you know, like 2,300 people there. This was, you know, over 10,000. And I remember at the time, oh my God, all those people. I mean, it was this kind of the stadium phenomenon and Woodstock that really changed the whole rock and roll business and turned it into a business from what it had been before, when the promoters realized that they could, you know, get 10,000 or 50,000 people all together at once, and the groups realized that they could do one show for 50,000, you know, for 10,000 people instead of 4 shows over 2 nights at the Fillmore East for 2,500 people each night, and make more money for less work. And Woodstock established the viability of the whole business, that there was an audience out there. So, but I remember when we, this was the same night that I took the Janice and Tina picture, and I thought, oh my God, all these people, this is, Well, years and years later, I've gone back to some concerts at Madison Square Garden, and it felt positively intimate compared to, you know, a 50,000 seat, you know, stadium. So it's all a matter of proportion. And it was Mick Jagger looking very young. I've printed the picture on the right as I mean, these are two frames put together in a Photoshop as a double, but the frame on the right I also sell as a single image, which I call Angelic Jagger. And Keith Richards, you know, when you can still see the boy and his face there before it began to disintegrate. and that's Nick from those concerts. This is the Joshua Light Show, Joe's Lights, with the Allman Brothers at the final concert of the Fillmore East, which was on June 27th, 1971. And here's another frame with the light show from that show there. And then this is Taj Mahal and the 4 tubas, and this is my favorite photograph of the light show in black and white, because it just is the composition and the way that works in there. I don't know how many of you know Taj Mahal. I think he's great. Yeah. And that's Albert King. And Chuck Berry. That's double exposure with the light show there. And this is one of the rare times when the screen was up and I was able to get a shot where you could see the full backstage set up with Bill Graham at the microphone in the lower right corner. And so the light show was on this platform, 2 platforms actually, suspended from the back wall of the theater. So the light show was always, it was rear projection. And this is the whole light show complex on their 2 forms. And it's Tom Shoesmith on the top that did the Lumia projections, and then the 2 on the bottom, the overhead projectors where you'd see the liquid light plates and the color wheels and the mirror wheels and the slide projectors and the film projectors where loops and things were used. I mean, I worked for the light show producing, the light show was divided between hardware and software, and I provided software. I did all kinds of film loops and film sequences and slides and graphics. You can see on the wall there all the slides and that were used on and off during the show for material. And there's Tom using a Mylar sheet, and he would have a small little projector with that bulb there, and he would use the sheet, and you could get the like the bird to fly across the screen. And he had all kinds of different little specialty lights and wheels and masks and so forth to create those effects. And this is with the one of these overhead projectors that was used for graphics, and slide projectors and color wheels. You can get a sense of how some of that was done. And this is Cecily on the overhead projector with the liquid lights. They used clock faces in order to create those effects with the colored glycerin and oil liquids. And this is composition of 43 different images of the light show. And we're done. Of the pictures.